UV unwrapping, right? That's that process of taking your 3D object and basically making it into a two-dimensional version of itself, right? We're going to take this, we're going to kind of like basically like peel the skin off of it, right? And flatten it out, smooth it to make it look low distortion, right? So it can go over a two-dimensional image pretty well, right? That two-dimensional image could be whatever file form you want, right? It could be TIFF, Targa, PNG, OpenEXR, right? There's like lots of different formats. Depends on your target, your bit depth. But essentially, UV unwrapping is the process of taking a three-dimensional model and turning it into a two-dimensional version of itself that's kind of peeled, that has seams on it, that's kind of, you try to flatten and smooth out as well as you can so it's low distortion. And that way the actual text you paint or find or download or apply will lay on the surface pretty well, right? Will lay on the surface pretty well. All right. So that is where we're at with this. Now, like I said, I'm going to do some UV unwrapping for the other stuff later on, right? It's not like we're going to take care of all this stuff right at the moment, right? I'm going to focus mainly on the body today, and then we can do some UV unwrapping and some of the other stuff later on. All right. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the visibility, right, for these other objects, right? I really just want to focus on the ship itself and the ship body. Now, can you UV unwrap the whole ship for full asymmetrical texturing? Yes, you can, right? That is totally appropriate. That's totally fine. Our devices are not always the best, right? So I tend to try to make it a little easier on you guys, right, by having the same UVs on top, right? That does mean we lose the asymmetrical texturing ability, but we do kind of make our textures act twice as big as they are, right? It also provides us with doing half the work, although usually you can unwrap, mirror it over, then just relay out, right? So we are going to have our UVs rest on top. It just makes a little more sense for the computers we have and the devices you guys are using to maximize efficiency, right? All right, so in this case, I do want to delete half this model, right? That way I can UV unwrap half and then mirror it over. So I'm going to go to 3 for face mode. And you'll notice my mirror is actually still on this, right? So in this case, if I really want to, I can actually get rid of my mirror. So if you have a mirror still active, feel free to delete it, right? That'll get rid of half of it. Some of these computers something's going on weird. Right? That's not our computer. Okay, whatever. So remember, you can delete a modifier if you need to, right? You just click on X in your blue wrench area modifier to get rid of it, right? But if you don't, right, say your modifiers are all applied, you will have to delete half the model then. So that's when I'd go to 3 for face mode, or 2 for edge mode actually would work too, right? So I could always go to 2 for edge mode, and I could always double left click on these center edge loops, right? Shift double left click, shift double left click. And just try to kind of make sure to grab that center edge loop that kind of goes all the way through the model, right? So even though these are separate parts, there will be an edge loop that goes all the way through the center. So if you have your mirror modifier already applied, you will have to manually delete half. Not terribly difficult. Just kind of grab the edge loop down the center, right click, and we've seen this edge split a little bit recently, right? Edge split. So I just do edge split, and that unwelds that center edge loop, right? Once that center edge loop is unwelded, it becomes very easy for me to just go to 3 for face mode, shift select some faces on our models, right? And then, of course, I can use select linked, right? Select linked. In this case, I've got mine set to spacebar instead of the default right bracket. But basically, we wanted to unweld that edge loop down the center, and that's where you select that edge loop down the center. If you're in edge mode, you right-click edge split, and then it unwelds that center edge loop, so then only these polygons are linked, right? So even though these are all still the same object, they're no longer welded to each other at that center edge loop, which makes it very easy for me to hit delete, bring up the delete options, right? Faces. So whatever way you need to get rid of half of it, get rid of half of it, right? If you actually have a mirror modifier applied, just delete the mirror modifier, and that takes care of it. If, however, though, you don't have a mirror modifier applied, and this is fully, mirrored over, but no longer active modifier, you would have to delete half. And whatever way you want to delete half can be cool, but I find selecting those center edge loops, right, and then using that edge split option from right-click quite useful. And then we just select the link faces, delete faces. So one of the other things we want to do is we want to make sure to get a distortion grid on kind of our default material, right? So we're going to go down to the red sphere down here, right? It's over on our properties menu. You'll see it's the one that looks like a red sphere. I'll make sure I'm in object mode, 4 for object mode. Red sphere, right there. And in this case, we can create new material, but we can also just go to the little white sphere here and see if there's a material in there, which there isn't. So in this case, I can just hit material new, and it creates a material assigned to this object. Usually check to see if there's already one on there called material, and then you can just use that one. But this lets you kind of see and assign different materials to different objects. But in this case, there wasn't one, so I just hit new material, and it creates this. Now, we saw this at the end of our last project, right? Creating materials. We're going to see it plenty more on this one, right? Because we're going to do texturing on this. We're going to do a couple different map types. We're going to do some sculpting. So we're definitely going to get more stuff with materials again. But it can be great to just get a distortion grid on our model, and so it just gives us a quick reminder of the basics of materials. So I'm going to go to base color right here, and there's a little yellow dot. We click on that yellow dot for base color. It brings this up. I can then go to image texture, and now this is plugged in an image texture here. Now, I can open an existing one if I want to load one in from outside, but if I want to create a brand new one, I can create new. Once I create new, I can call this UVs. I'm probably going to make the pixel size larger. 1024, probably not the end of the world to have that, but I'm going to go 2048. Just double the size. And also, I'm going to tell the generated type to be different. I don't want blank, right? If you just want a color texture to paint yourself, just pick blank and pick the color you want right here, right? It's kind of cool. But if I click on the word blank here, there are other options like color grid and UV grid. So I want to pick UV grid, and that way it's going to make an actual kind of checkerboard texture for us. Set to 2048 by 2048 pixels, right? That's 248 pixels by 248 pixels. That's basically a pixel's a square of color, right? And I hit OK. And now that texture is plugged in and assigned. Now, by default, remember we have this top right corner here, part of our viewport right here. It's these little spheres, right? One kind of looks like just edges. That's our wireframe, right? We just see the edges. There's the fully white circle. That's the normal shaded. And, of course, I can use matte cap. And then there's the one that looks a lot like the material controls, right? That's a ball that looks like it's got a bit of a checkerboard in it. That will actually show texture. That will show texture on your model. It's actually going to show EV, all your material properties. It's actually really, really cool. We dabbled with it a little bit at the end of our last project. We're definitely going to see it even more and take it further on this project too. And you can see that this is what we're looking for, right? We want it to look like a nice checkerboard. So those UVs are great, but we can see all the rest of the UVs on this model are horrible, right? That's what we're looking for, is that. This is not what we're looking for. So you can see how we really have to UV unwrap this. If you try to put a texture, paint a texture on this, it's going to go badly. It's going to go horribly, right? So that's why we put that little checkerboard texture on there, so we can see what's going on with our UVs and if they're laid out well, right? We want to make sure there's enough parts that we can maximize and take up a lot of the pixels in the texture. But we also want to make sure that it's kind of flattened and smoothed out well enough that the checkerboard looks pretty checkerboard, because that indicates we have low distortion. That means when you paint your texture, it's going to go on and look nice, right? Think about it like a wrinkled shirt, right? If you have a really cool logo on your shirt, you kind of just crumple it up and float on the ground, you can't really see the logo, right? To see the logo nice and neat, you have to kind of smooth that shirt back out, kind of de-wrinkle it, kind of lay it out, fold it, kind of make sure it's all smoothed out, and then you'll see the logo, right? Kind of think of it like UVs that way, right? Bad UVs are just a crumpled up shirt you've thrown on the floor and you can't really see the logo that well. Or a crumpled up poster or whatever. Good UVs are when that shirt or the poster is laid out to be smooth and clean so you can see the image well, right? That's what that checkerboard offers us, a nice little way to see the distortion. All right, now, for now, the material preview is going to be annoying to see this, so I'll just kind of set my white sphere back on. And I'm going to go to the UV Editing Workspace, right? Because remember, we have these different workspaces up here. Modeling, sculpting, UV Editing. And we go to UV Editing, you see a couple of things. One, we see there's our 3D space, our 3D view. And then there's the actual UV editor, which is a 2D view, because that's what UVs are. Basically, it's X and Y for textures, which are two-dimensional. Now, it's often a good idea to go to the green triangle here, go to UV Maps, right there. You don't have to do this, but it's not a bad idea for organizational purposes. When you open up the UV Maps section, you can double-click on this and call it Ship. There we go. Now what I want to start to do is mark seams. Now, one of the things we have to keep in mind is that some of these seams are already going to work well, right? We know that there is already separations here. So we don't really need seams there. This will work pretty well. So we have to think about is kind of the fact that this is going to unwrap better if I have a top of the ship and a bottom of the ship. So I'm going to go to 2 for edge mode, right? 2 for edges. And I'm going to double left click on edge loops, right? So I can shift double left click to add basically edge loops going all the way around here. Now, I'm not sure if I want this one going all the way through there, so I can easily just Q. Remember, Q toggles you through, cycles you through your different selection types. So Q is your quickie for selection. By default, it's rectangle select. If I hit Q again, it's circle select. And if I hold down Control, you see I can just deselect by dragging, right? So I just kind of grab those edge loops and even partial loops. Right click. So part of your edge context menu is the ability to lower down a mark seam. Some of you remember this from our last project. It has been a few months, right? It has been a little while, like a month and a half, 2 months since we did it last, right? It's been a little while. But the actual process of UV wrapping is quite straightforward, right? Make sure you got a distortion texture on there, which you don't need per se, but it helps you to see if your UV unwrapping is going well, right? If your UVs are low distortion. So it's always good to have those on to test that. But really, UV unwrapping is really just selecting edge loops and then right-click Mark Seam. And you see all of a sudden those seams become red, right? Now in this case, I really feel like I do need to kind of maybe do a little more of a seam here, so I'm going to hit Q to go back to my rectangle select. I think I'll put a seam right here. So double left click to select that edge loop. Right click Mark Seam. If you have some extra edges here, right, I accidentally have a few extra edges there, right click Clear Seam, right? So it's really easy to get rid of a seam also. It's right below Mark Seam, Clear Seam. Remember, you can select an edge and then shift left click on that same edge loop. Actually, it doesn't even have to be on the same edge loop, but it's usually best if that's the case. And remember, select linked has shortest path. You notice I have a quick key for that because I use that tool often. And that selects between those selections. Right click, Mark Seam. Now, remember, you can really select this any way you want to. Right? So it's kind of up to you on how you want to select those edges. I just want to try to give you the benefit of showing you circle select again, shortest path. Blender has great selection tools. I think this is a good start, right? I might still need a bit more seams as we go here, but I think this will be a good start to try to see what we can get. But you can kind of see how I basically kind of decided the window should be its own thing. and at the top and the bottom should be its own thing, although that does mean I probably should have a loop through here. So remember, 2 for edge mode, double left click, right click, brings up your edge context menu, mark seam. Now that I've got those set up, let's try an unfold. So I'm going to go to 3 for face mode, although it doesn't really matter. Control A for select, right? Remember, that's the very top of your select menu. Select all, Control A. And I'm going to turn my my material preview back on, so I'm just going to turn that on, right? The little third ball, right there. And now I'm going to go to the UV menu here in the UV editor, right? Because you see how the UV editor has its own menus right here? One of them is called UV. You actually technically have it over here too, right? And there is an area called Unwrap, right? Unwrap. And there we go. And you saw that actually did a pretty good job. Like I said, I felt like the seams were already in pretty good shape to give us something fairly low distortion. If we wanted to make it a little easier on this, we could always add a little more, right? So I could always go to 2 for edge mode, maybe mark a seam there, just because that kind of comes out a little bit. Maybe mark a seam here, right? Right click, mark seam. And you say you can go and add more. So you can give it a try and then say, hey, I want to try this now. I'm going to go back, select all, right? I usually do it in face mode, but Control A for select all. UV, unwrap, unwrap, and there we go. And you notice how when we look at this, it's all looking pretty checkerboard, right? You usually don't need to get yourself to 0 distortion, just low distortion, right? So if you can see it and look at this and it looks pretty checkerboard, you're in pretty good shape. So we can now see that this is a pretty solid UV unwrap. Now if I put my cursor over, and remember you can always grab the little bar right between these to make one of the windows bigger or smaller. Right, so you can always kind of grab this area right there, left click drag. And you have your own selection tools in here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 is object mode, normally in 3D view. Here it's island view. It'll select these actual little chunks where the seams are at, right? So if I want to maximize this a little bit, I could still maximize it a little bit, right? I'll usually just select all. We can go in here and we could do something like pack UVs to just kind of repack, or even try pack islands. Kind of repack them, resize them a little bit. You see it already done a pretty good job. But don't feel like you can't go in here and maybe scale some of these up just a little bit. Right? So we can kind of bring these up a little bit just to kind of maybe give these a little bit more. Keep in mind that you do have to be aware of textile density, as they call it. Texture element. Textile is short for texture element. What that means is that you should usually have a pretty even distribution of pixels. Having said that, a little bit of scaling some of this up, it's not going to kill you, right? You notice how these checkerboard areas still look pretty good. They still look like they're about the same density as the rest around it. Because we only scaled them up by like 25, 30%, right? If I was to scale this up by like 500%, you see how that gets a ridiculous amount more density than the rest of it? That will start to be noticeable in terms of this getting really nice resolution and this not getting as nice resolution. Although this is out of the quadrant, so that'll create a whole bunch of other problems as well. But scaling a little bit, as long as it's not a lot, is usually not going to be too much an issue because you don't change the textile density too much, right? You're just not changing it that much. So I often will find myself just coming in and doing a few last-minute tweaks, right? Scale a few parts up a little bit, move them around a little bit, just to take up a little bit more pixel space, right? It's always good if you can take up a little bit more of your pixels without radically altering the textile density. And remember 4 is great because it does just kind of grab these objects right in here. So I'm just going here and doing a little bit of manual tweaks to that stuff. But you see how now more of the pixels are being used in the texture without us having radically altered the overall density, right? Everything still looks like it's roughly getting the same amount of pixels. So minor tweaks like that, not a problem, right? It allows you to get a few more pixels on your UVs, a little more of your texture will show up on your model, and you're not radically altering the density, the textile density. All right, and that is probably a great place for us to stop for today. When you're happy with this, you can always just go back to your blue wrench, add modifier mirror, mirrors it over, and of course you can apply that mirror. And now you'll see all the UVs are on top of each other actually. See? You can always relay them out if you need to, right? It's always pretty easy to do that. And then you get the same texture on both sides. So you lose asymmetry, but your texture will act twice as big, right? You can make a 2048 act like a 4096. But your texture will have to be identical on both sides because the UVs are on top of each other. All right. Now I officially think that'll be a great place to stop. Now, remember, you can always just do save as, right? File save as. Shift Control S. And I'm going to call this one Spaceship version UV. That way I know it's specifically for the UVs. All right. I think that'll be a great place to stop.